Okay, so it had to be about 6 months ago, but someone had a question on LinkedIn. They were like, HubSpot needs lookup properties. And I was like, that's very interesting, because about a year and a half ago, as I was playing around with the APIs, troubleshooting some things, and I'll show you what that process looks like, I found that you can create properties that have a dropdown that references other objects. And I was like, this is very interesting. At the time, I didn't have a use case for it. I was still trying to think through what could be used for these. Could you find contacts from other contacts? Could you use these as pseudo associations? What could you use them for? But it turns out that there was a massive number of people that wanted these, and I just had no idea. I had just kept that knowledge just stored away in my brain. But I posted it on LinkedIn in a quick little comment. Someone found that comment and blew it up in a post, and then it blew up in several more posts. And then everyone was like, wow, HubSpot now has lookup properties. And I was like, I think they've always had lookup properties, but they have now been discovered. But I wanted to quickly run through what are lookup properties in HubSpot, how inner workings work there, how you could stumble upon some things like this yourself, and also how to create them. So kind of the number one tool for all that I'm going to share here is a tool called Postman. And again, sorry for the infinite loop here. I'm going to scroll to the side so it hides that. Okay, so here's the tool called Postman. What Postman allows you to do is basically hit HubSpot's endpoints or any other company's endpoints. These are machine-to-machine communication. So where the HubSpot UI is like human to machine, this is machine to machine. And so we're telling one machine, hey, can you go access HubSpot servers and send HubSpot some data or get some data from HubSpot? So what we have right here is the HubSpot properties endpoint. And specifically, it's the contact properties endpoint. So here's how all the HubSpot endpoints look. They say api.hubapi.com, and then we're using our CRM, and it's the version 3 of this API. And we're saying, hey, hit the properties endpoint and pass through contacts, so we know it's contacts. The other thing I'll point out here in Postman is you can specify what type of request this is. So this is what type of action you're trying to request from HubSpot. In this case, we're sending a GET request. You can also send a POST request, which is you're giving some data into HubSpot versus you're requesting some data out of HubSpot. You also have patch and delete. Those are kind of the 4 main ones that you should worry about here. But right now, let's look at what this GET request sends back. So what we just have done to HubSpot, and we'll send this request here, is, and actually, funny enough, our authentication has expired. So I'm going to walk you through what you need to do there to get set up. Just because you have an address, you now actually need to say, hey, HubSpot, here's how you know it's me. Here's how you know it's me accessing this. Postman has this great auth type called HubSpot CRM APIs. And basically, Hannah and the DevRel team have worked with Postman to get OAuth working in HubSpot and Postman. So I'll click Authorize right down here. Again, this is under the Authorize tab, and we'll click Authorize. And what that's going to do is it's going to launch this little window here. And I'm going to connect up one of my accounts. We'll click Choose Account. We'll connect app. Authorization successful. It's now redirected me back to Postman. And again, now I can send that request again. And OK, we didn't get that error that time. So now you can see here, these are actually all the properties for contacts in my portal. And this gives you a lot of information that you probably don't need or probably don't care about. But this is what HubSpot sees as kind of the back end for all these properties. Well, I noticed that there was a couple of properties that have this reference object type parameter in them. And basically, it seemed like all these properties were basically lookup properties in HubSpot that were referencing other properties. So I took one of these properties, and I basically said, hey, HubSpot, could you create a property that looks just like this? And HubSpot's like, hey, we got you. And so what we're going to do here is we're now going to create one of those properties. So we're going to send a POST request. Again, we're giving data into HubSpot. We're telling it to do something. So we're going to make a POST request, and we're going to say, hey, properties, contacts, let's create a deal lookup property, and we're going to name it deal lookup. And again, we're going to label it deal lookup. It has a type of enumeration. We'll share this little snippet at the end of this talk. It has a type of select, and we're throwing it in the contact information group. And we're saying, hey, it does have external options, which HubSpot just notes as like a lookup property. and the object it's referencing is deal. Now, the fun thing here is you can mark this as ticket, you could mark this as contact, you could mark this as company. For right now, let's just create a deal lookup property. So we're going to send a post request, and HubSpot just created one. It said 201 created, so that was a successful response. Now, if we go back into our HubSpot here, and we go into our properties, we can actually see HubSpot just created a deal lookup property. And if we go into here, we can see the deal type is a dropdown, but instead of it having dropdown options that we specified, it has all these objects in here with the record IDs. Now, what this looks like on a particular contact here, let's go into one of our contacts, deal lookup, boom. Now, this is awesome, right? You have all of your deals that is in HubSpot. You can search across them. You don't need to keep these objects in sync. You just create the property once. If you create a new deal, it's going to automatically be added to this list. If deals get deleted, they're going to be removed from this list. You don't need to worry about it being out of sync or you having inaccurate data. And again, another great thing about it is the internal value of this property is actually that deal ID or that ticket ID or that contact ID, whatever object type you've asked it to be. And so now we can save that. And again, this creates a very powerful thing. So instead of always creating an association, you could sometimes use it in properties. And I've seen people do really cool things like creating properties for product bundles and other such things like that. So I think this has a lot of power, and it just needed a couple of LinkedIn posts to unveil to show how powerful it could be. And I think we're going to kick it over to Ian because Ian has some awesome stuff. But throw it in the chat if you have any questions. But Ian has a couple of examples of how he's using these property types.
Yeah, thanks, Carter. So I was one of these people who saw this post get pulled up from a long time ago. I think somebody else posted about it, and then I posted about it. And it just got me thinking about how we could use it. So let me just share my screen. I can talk you through, I guess, the use case that kind of made the most sense for me. So what I've done is I've started by creating a property just in the way that Carter walked us through, which is on a deal. So it's a deal property, but it's referencing the contact object. And so what I'm doing is I'm basically just matching it to association labels that I have set up. So for example, billing contact is the one I have here. It could be decision maker or whatever association label you are using. But my goal here was to make a way so that when I'm going through the deal pipeline, that I can basically force sales reps to say, this is the person who should be the billing contact. And then for that to also appear in the association label. So maybe to kind of give you a bit more of an example of what that looks like. You guys might be familiar with, in your pipeline settings, you have the ability to put in certain properties and say, this is required. So for example, I put country of origin here, really simple. They have to choose it. But by creating these properties in the way that Carter has just described, we now have the option of forcing people to choose a billing contact as well. So that's really cool, and that works, really well, and it makes it a kind of a nice experience. But if we want to take it just like that next step further, if we take a look at my example pipeline here, if we take this qualified to buy deal, I'm going to put it into the presentation scheduled stage, which is where we have made these fields required. So let's just say it's in Ireland. Let's just go with myself or something as the person here. So what I've done is it's popped up that you have to pick somebody who's going to be the billing contact. And then what that allows me to do is when we open up the deal, there's a workflow in place that just takes a second or two to do its thing. So let me just give this a quick refresh.
And Ian, that's a great thing about it being that, like the internal value of that property being that record ID, right? So we can super easily match on whoever the contacts are, and right, like we don't want to replace associations, but kind of augment them and provide different outputs for that.
Yeah, exactly. I think I might have maybe not put re-enrollment on my on my workflow when I was testing it out earlier. But the idea of what happens is that it takes the person who we've selected as that billing contact and actually creates the association up in the corner for us to actually put the associated contact in there with the correct label on it. And so the way to do that, and the way to make it happen, is by using like a pretty straightforward workflow, which is just that billing contact is known so that there's somebody in there. And that's just one simple action, which is basically to create an association. So if we use the create associations action that's here, we want to create an association between the deal and a contact. We're applying the label that we want. And very importantly, we're choosing the matching properties value. So we're matching the property that's on, the property value on that billing contact property, which we created. And we're matching it to record ID, because again, as Carter said, the record ID is the internal value for each of those. So with that, once you have your re-enrollment turned on and your workflow set up correctly, it'll basically not only force people to pick someone in the dropdown, but then it will actually create that association for you as well. That's pretty much my use case.
I love it, because this is something so many people have asked me for, which I don't set the product roadmap, but the fact that this can be built is incredible. I love it so much. So we will, I think, keep moving. If people have questions for Ian or Carter, feel free to drop those in the chat or the Q&A, whichever. Chat might be good since they're here. We will move on to you, Casey.
Hello, thank you. So I am not talking about lookup fields today, but I'm excited to be invited here because this is a solution that when I built it out, anybody I had a call with for the next 2 weeks, I was like, yeah, I know we came to talk about this other thing, but I want to show you this that I built because it's a crazy, weird workaround. And I'm excited to talk to a bunch of HubSpot nerds about it. So one of my clients came to me and they had a interactive funnel experience they wanted to build. So they wanted to use a form, ask a few questions, and then based on the outputs, recommend a software. Specifically for this, it's a couple of Epic softwares. They're a B2H, business to hospital company, business to healthcare. So there's 3 primary Epic softwares that they sell, and based on the outcomes, they wanted to recommend which one would be the best fit. When they asked me for this, I said, great, no problem, I can build it. Then I went to build it and very quickly was like, okay, I can score based on 1, but essentially we needed 3 different scores. And then we needed to see which of those scores was the highest. So that was the problem that we were encountering. And I did try out a few third-party tools and nothing was quite giving me all of the pieces I needed. And if you know me, you know that I very rarely say no. So I kind of kept going and we were able to build the form itself in the new HubSpot form tool. And from here, after I had all the questions built out, I used the new HubSpot lead scoring tool to score each individual solution option. So for example, for Rover, we have a dedicated score property based on the outcomes of the form. But then we also have a score for the 3 others, Haiku and Canto. Now is where it got a little more tricky because now I was able to score all of them, but I wasn't able to figure out which one was the highest score. And so I started mustering through the calculated fields. And what I was able to come out with was I have 3 separate calculated fields for this. Each is comparing 2 of the 3 scores. So Rover versus Haiku, Rover versus Canto, and then Haiku versus Canto. And the property here is saying if Rover's score is higher than Haiku, say Rover. If Haiku is greater than Rover, say Haiku. Otherwise, they're a tie. And then I'm able to use a workflow to find which score is the highest. So for example, if when comparing Rover to Canto score, Rover is highest, and when comparing Rover to Haiku, Rover is highest, then Rover is the highest overall score. And now I can send an email out to the person filling out the form to deliver their score, their recommendation. We do have ties that happen. So for example, in this example, there was Canto, Rover, but then a tie. Those get manually reviewed at this time, mostly because we actually don't know. We have to kind of talk to the person in that instance. But a lot of pieces of HubSpot cobbled together into some automation. That's it.
Love it. These logic puzzles are always delightful to work through. All right, Ricky, if everything's working on your end, you want to go?
Yes. I've learned to log out and log back in.
It's an important skill.
Yes. Now to share screen. Perfect. All right. So my dilemma, essentially, or what I do at my company is support our chief strategy officer, and in our one-on-ones, the main problem she had or described was that she gets a report every day, line item after line item of every single deal we have in our 3 different pipelines. And it's really hard for her to distinguish what happened, what changed. And there's lots of things that can change in our pipeline because every single one of my deal stages has its own exit criteria. That are very particular to that stage. There's a reason why we ask that particular question when you put a deal into pending. Easy example I would give is throughout the entire deal process, the monthly revenue, what we think we can get out of this deal, is going to change as we start to generate pricing, send pricing, and go back and forth with contract negotiations. So that was her big struggle, is every day looking at that big spreadsheet, couldn't get away from a spreadsheet and figuring out what happened and what changed. So what I did was I built lots of properties and workflows to stamp when deals change. And I have to do a picture of this dashboard just to keep things confidential. So I am stamping, I have a property when deals enter a close stage, when they actually change deal stages, when the revenue changes, when the deal status changes, that's high, medium, and low. And of course, natively, we've always had the property when a deal is created. And that's what I'm really starting to work off, is those particular properties. I had to make them date pickers because another issue we have in our company is we are a global company, and my boss could be in Arizona and New York in the same day and have a meeting with somebody who's in Singapore, and the date time field was really messing with these dashboards where they were getting one result and not the other. So that's one other tweak I had to do, is make sure that these were date picker properties. So no matter what time zone somebody was in, they were looking at the same data. Now what I do with this dashboard is communicate information another way. Sometimes information is sent in graphs or digested in graphs, sometimes table, and then other times in word form. Everything in this email are different properties that we're collecting. And I'm able to send an email to my boss and the rest of senior leadership, actually, and save 7 people time and tell them what changed yesterday. This particular deal got put into closed loss. Of course, we're asking reasons why. Sometimes, do they want a reminder to look at that deal in the future? And I'm going to communicate that up. Every time revenue changes, we want to report that, because it's really hard to see in a big pipeline worth millions of dollars when something changes $10,000 here, $100,000 there. And I really like to actually quantify that information, because sometimes taking $100,000 off a monthly revenue for some deals is a 3% change, and there's other times where we lessen the price $3,000 on another deal, and that's a 40% change. And so every day I create this change report to let our senior leadership know what happened the day before. The very last piece is at the end of the month. I do take use a snapshot of the pipeline. I don't think I have it screenshotted here quite well. No, just to give them some figures on how our pipeline grew or shrank over that particular month or quarter. And the other added benefits from it is we are catching problems or bad data in our deals right away. Sometimes people fat finger things and miss a digit, and $45,000 is way different than $450,000. There are times that people pick high, we call it status here, but high priority instead of medium or low. And our senior leadership would consider that medium or maybe low. And that actually matters, because that's how we look at our forecasting numbers. Sometimes the salesperson really thinks it's a shoe-in deal, but our senior leadership knows better. And catching these problems, sometimes catching duplicate deals as they're created is great. Catching deal owners putting them in the wrong pipeline. But it is all good things that we catch right away. And so it's really helped the quality of our data in our pipeline as well. But yeah, that is my tip and trick to show.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that. A sort of a meta question here. Lisa said, "So great your leadership reads what you send out," and that's getting lots of pointed emojis reactions. I'd love to know how long you've been doing this. How did this start?
It just started from that one-on-one. I work best when I hear problems, when people are griping, and they're like, "Oh, I take a long time to do this," and it was really just my boss in a one-on-one saying, "Man, it really stinks. I can't see what changes every day." And I'm like, I think I have an idea. Give me a second. Give me a second. I'm like, why can't I? And sometimes this is a lot of work. Sometimes that email takes me 2 hours.
Oh man.
But it is appreciated. There are people who have given me feedback. There's one senior leader, in fact, actually, it's funny that you said to read emails, who never reads any emails, never replies to anything. I can't get them to do anything in HubSpot. But they said my email is the first email they read every morning, because like what is happening and they're in Singapore. But yes, yeah, we definitely catch a lot there. And we also gained a lot of traction because after a few months, my boss went out on maternity leave. And so this was really how I was keeping her peers in the loop to cover her back while she was out of the office for 3 or 4 months. And it was good. The CEO started seeing those emails, and definitely helped me keep my job, I would say, where they could see the value in HubSpot, and not just all the cool stuff I like to blab about.
Yeah, for sure. All right, thanks for sharing that. And Waylon will be our final presenter, and then we'll head over to the Q&A. So if anyone has any questions about anything you've seen so far or anything Waylon says, put them there. We are going to have plenty of time to dig.
Yeah, I was going to have no time, but now there's going to be plenty of time for me to yap. Okay, I'm going to share my screen a little bit. So we're going to be talking about record views. And record views is kind of a huge topic, and just showing you a bunch of random record views that I have in my portals is not really going to benefit that many people, I don't think. So I'm going to focus this kind of on just like some basics and like the general kind of things that I've learned and some pitfalls that I've fallen into that maybe I can help others stay out of. I encourage you to ask questions. It looks like we'll have a little bit of time to answer them. And let's go ahead and get started. But first, like any good AI prompt, we're going to add some context. I'm not going to read all this. I'm going to send this, though, in the chat if anyone wants to view this with me. Just to give you an idea of where I'm coming from, what my portal's like. You will need Pro Plus to use this from a HubSpot perspective. But your portals are obviously going to be very different to mine. So I encourage you to think about this through your own lens. So record views, very broadly speaking, are what your end users see. And they're split into 3 primary sections. We're going to talk about them in this order, from the left to the middle to the right-hand side. And they're all a little different into what cards you have access to. You'll hear me use that word a lot. Cards is what HubSpot refers to the individual blocks that hold the individual pieces that make up a record view. This is all pretty basic stuff, but just to kind of anchor us with the jargon we'll be using, this is a record view, specifically a deal, and the left-hand side has cards, middle has cards and tabs, and the right-hand side has cards. So before we even get into the actual view itself, I think this is probably the most important thing to think about before you start. And that's that your record views are dependent on the main team of the users that you're on, and then what team you assign that view to. So extra teams give you access to that data. Main teams is what's going to define your view. This is important because what your users do in HubSpot may or may not be the same as what their quote unquote team is from your kind of business perspective. As an example, if you have a sales team, maybe that sales team is made up of a couple of enterprise sellers, a couple of small business sellers, a couple of mid-market. Maybe they work in different pipelines depending on certain scenarios. Like, this is one team from the business perspective, but from what they're doing in HubSpot, their experiences may be very different. And so their record views may need to be different or may end up being different based on how their team and some other stuff that we talk about interacts. And you can kind of see this last point here. You can have, specifically on the left-hand side, properties conditionally applied in cards based on other properties on the record that they're viewing. And this will interact with and kind of stack with the team view at large. So, I have my examples here. If you're an enterprise AE viewing a deal that is closed won, that's one view. If you're a small business rep, it's going to look a little different. And if you're a leadership, if you're on the leadership team, it might look a third way. So you have these different things all interacting. And at least as of now, it's a bit tedious to view a single record as multiple views as an admin. The way I typically do it is I'll just change my team. I'll move myself to whatever main team that view is on, and then I'll play around with it a little bit and then move myself back. You can also impersonate other users, but that's, in my opinion, a little more clunky. But because of this, and because it's a bit obnoxious to kind of interact with this really quickly, you can end up in scenarios where you have users reporting something that is difficult for you to see and understand. So just keep that in the back of your head. There's a lot of layers of permissions at the property level, teams, and then again at the conditional level that can kind of make this behave differently and easier or harder to manage. So consider teams first. Let's talk about the left-hand side. So this is probably the simplest group in that they hold properties. All the cards on the left-hand side hold properties. And this is where I think you can get kind of the easiest, lowest hanging fruit value from using record views, which is that if you have an object, in this case, we're going to be talking mainly about deals. If you have an object that is in a particular state, for example, a pipeline or a deal stage, you can have an entire card deploy or not deploy on that record. And the screenshot on the right kind of shows you what it looks like from the builder. And that little, I don't know, it looks next to the little description bubble. It's like a little tree looking thing to indicate that it's conditional. Depending on properties on the record, you can deploy or not deploy these blocks, which can make for really clean and really easy to kind of reduce the number of properties that you have on any given object at any given time. It's important to note that you can only do this with dropdowns and enumerations, so pick lists, things like this. You can't use dates, and you can't use like open text fields to deploy conditional cards on the left-hand side. So here's a quick example. You're on the core sales team, and you're viewing the exact same deal in 3 different states, which in this case is a pipeline. In your portal, maybe this looks a little different. Maybe this is a company with a different lead status. Maybe this is a contact who lives in a different state. There's any number of things that you could consider to add or remove property groups. But for this example, you can kind of see how if the deal is won or lost, the properties that we care about are going to be a little different. And this allows for something that I like to call fill the space process, which if you're talking to your sales reps and you say, hey, when you close the deal, if you close win or close loss, there's going to be a group of properties that you'll see that you didn't see before. All of those should be filled out on a closed won deal or on a closed loss deal. And you can just that's your blanket kind of process rule to the team. Like, hey, like if this group exists, there should be a property in every one of these, or you should be able to speak to the emptiness, if that makes sense. So that's kind of how I think about it. How I think about it. And you can see kind of like how many different ways you could potentially use this. Let's talk about the middle section. The middle section is the most creative. There's a bunch of random cards you can use in the middle section. And you can also add or remove tabs. I'd be really curious to hear actually from other admins. It feels like to me, you really only have 2 tabs. Like I feel like my users have blinders on and they can see the overview tab and the activities tab, and anything extra is basically only for me. I don't know if that's just a result of like, habits and new tabs being kind of new, or if I'm doing a poor job of making them valuable. But it's very unusual in my experience for users to like flip through lots of tabs. Yeah, maxed out tabs. Like, so your experience will vary. But you can get really, really like, narrow and customize in this middle section. And the way I like to think about it is like when we're thinking about deals, your sales reps need to do stuff to the deal. They have actions they need to take. So I want to get those actions in front of them. Whereas your leadership team needs to consume the kind of like downstream effects of those actions, right? They're looking at the characteristics, they're looking at deal health. How did the upstream process do to this point? So I'm just going to go through quick examples here. There's a lot of stuff here. I encourage you to check this out if you haven't already. There's probably a card out there that's really valuable to you that you just haven't encountered yet. And I've screenshotted what it will look like if I'm using a standard card, which you can just toggle on and off. These are just baked into HubSpot. I really like the all-bound timeline, which is just showing you inbound and outbound communications. I have this on almost all of our records where we can put it there, just because it's an easy way to like look and see like what's immediately in the past, what's immediately in the future. You can do these things called property date trackers, which are like tracking up to a certain date. In this example, I'm just using the close date, but you could use any date. If this is in the middle of a ticket pipeline, for example, and maybe you're using this pipeline for onboarding or for some other kind of process related thing, you could show this tracker kind of ticking up to an important date. Stage trackers are baked in. So if you have deal stages, I think this works for ticket statuses too. You can just add that and it will kind of do this for you. You don't have to do any setup. The property date one, you can pick the properties that you view. And then my personal favorite for users is probably quick actions, which is just putting stuff on the record that makes it super easy for end users to, in this case, add associations, which is one of the things that's like most important to me. And now that I've watched this show and tell, I'm actually going to look into doing some lookups, because I think that could really be beneficial, maybe even in addition to this or instead of this quick action thing. Because maybe you have the dropdown just living in a property and you can pick it from there. So this view, what we're seeing here on the right-hand side, this larger screenshot, is what the sales rep would see, this like top few things. And then this is maybe what the leadership team might see. So they're going to get the summary, they're going to get the all bound, and they're going to get any pinned activity, like first 3 things. This is, again, is an example, but it kind of goes to show, like, depending on the priorities of the user, you might want to surface certain things first or on different tabs or not at all, right? So, and again, you can see these are all standard cards that you can just toggle on from that right-hand side, or I say right-hand side, from the record view editor, excuse me. Some other stuff to consider that's new-ish are things like statistics, which they look at an associated object and then they do math. So, for example, this is one of the simplest implementations. You count the number of associated contacts. You could sum the amount of deals. You can do all kinds of things with this. Again, use your imagination. Know that it's there. This is one that I forgot about until I was building this, and I was like, oh yeah, like, maybe there's some value to be had here. And then another one that I really like is the associated stage tracker. So if you have an object with an associated object that's in a stage, easy example, company with a deal that's in a pipeline. Or in this case, my example is a company with a ticket in a bug pipeline, which is synced up with our Jira board. So when bugs get reported in HubSpot, they kind of track their way through and see how the dev team is doing. This is super useful. Like, you can drag all this to the front middle section, and then you're looking at 4 different objects and all their statuses all at the same time. So again, you can improve the amount of information density and reduce the number of clicks that you have to go through to get to any given answer. Yeah, micro dashboard. That's another one. You can do reports as well. I don't know if I have any examples of those, but you can do a report in a card, and these are single object reports. I don't use a ton of them, to be honest, but they can be super powerful. It depends on how your reports are built, and most of ours are custom report builder, and that's mostly just because that's where I've built most of my reports. But if you're better at building reports and use more single object ones, you can embed them all over the place and make for really, really cool, like you said, basically like a dashboard living on the object. Okay. Yeah, I talk about reports here. The last middle section cards that kind of highlight are activity totals, easy counts of inbound, outbound activities, and then apps. Apps I'm not going to get into. If you have an app connected to your HubSpot, check if it has a card. It will either be in the middle or the right-hand section. Some of them are super awesome and powerful, but it will depend on the app and depend on the card. And then lastly, we're going to talk about the right-hand side. And hopefully, I haven't been going too fast, and hopefully somebody's learned something from this. But on the right-hand side, you have associations and apps, and then a few kind of bonus standard cards. The associations are super straightforward. That's just going to be, here's all the connected objects. You can add or remove them. We're all familiar with this. The only kind of note I have here is, depending on your team, maybe certain teams do or don't need access to certain objects or don't need to see them. At the very least, you can reorder this for your users so that the most important stuff is to the top. That's generally what I try to do. Another note on apps. Some apps really love to just put cards onto the right-hand side, even if you're not using them ever. So if you're going to have clutter on the right-hand side of your records, it's probably an app that has an extra card that you aren't using that particular part of their service or whatever. So consider that. And then I highlight all the standard cards that I really like. The Breeze record summary is pretty new. I don't have a ton of data and experience on this yet, but I'm trying out every AI feature I can get my hands on just to make sure I'm not missing anything. And then obviously attachments. We talked about the lead stage tracker, which is just a tracker of an associated object, playbooks, invoices, etc. So that's kind of the gist of it, the basic, the broad strokes. And then I have my record view words of wisdom, which again, if you want this wall of text, you're welcome to grab that link I shared and come in and view it for yourself, or copy it, make a copy, whatever you want to do. But consider teams first, because if you're like me, this is where you're going to run into problems, right? Where it's oh man, I thought these 10 users were all the same team from the HubSpot perspective, but it's really kind of caused a problem because, 1 or 2 of them needs to see things a little differently. And I made my views a little too narrow. Use conditional left-hand cards is my second one. I think you don't even need to do team-based views if you do this well. If you want to save a little bit of space and improve your again, your ability to keep your users moving and to not overwhelm them with properties. You can have a single default view and just use a handful of these, and it's really, really effective. This also pairs really well with conditional properties in general, because then you maybe have one controlling property that unfolds into the 4 or 5 that you need. And if you want to get really crazy, you can even go a layer deeper and do conditional options, which are basically like, if you have a list of options to pick, you can narrow them down based on other properties. As an example, in our bug report pipeline that I mentioned earlier, the only category you can select in that pipeline is bug report. And I do that just to signal like just another layer of like making sure my user's in the right place and that they know that they're doing the right thing, right? If the only option they have is bug report, they know that they're submitting a bug report. And then lastly, talk to your users and remember that views have non-zero attention cost. And what I mean by that is your users use the product differently than you do. Take that into account, sit with them, learn from them how they click on stuff, what gets in their way, what causes them to leave an object that maybe you could bring into that middle section for them. And then remember that whatever you set up here, again, at least right now, it's a little bit of a pain to debug, if you will. And so you're going to have to maintain it. So if your teams are constantly changing, if your processes are constantly changing, it may not be worth going on a super deep adventure of building these record views if it means that every week you're going to have questions that involve you logging in as a user being like, oh yeah, I guess they do need to see that property. So just keep that in mind and plan ahead. But that's like the basics. That's what I've got for you today. Looks like we've got plenty of time for questions and I did, if we want to pause on what I'm saying, I had a question for Carter.
Go for it.
Because I saw it come through the Q&A and it got answered, but I think I interpreted it a little differently.
Yeah.
So they asked, is there a way to keep property dropdowns like in sync with one another? It, like not necessarily based on the objects, but like, and I deal with this a lot personally, so this is a good question. But if I have 20 options in a dropdown on object A and I want to keep those 20 in sync on object B, can you use this lookup to do that?
So you definitely could. The thing would be, you can't use the lookup properties. You would have to use like a custom workflow that runs pretty much daily to check for new objects, and new labels and values in those properties, and then sync them to the other ones. Or you could set up a cron job. But with the lookup properties, they're based on the objects in HubSpot. And one thing I'll point out about the lookup properties is they don't support custom objects. So you can't create like a custom services or something and then use that on 5 different objects and 5 different fields on those 5 different objects. So that's one kind of caveat to these lookup properties. You can't use custom objects as your reference object, but you could totally do that with like a cron job that goes in and daily updates your properties across a couple different objects and a couple different properties if you wanted to.
It's good to know. I'm just doing it by hand right now.
Yeah.
Kyle, I have a product recommendation. I love that you can copy options from other properties. It's crazy that you can't copy new options from other properties. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Or like at least the behavior, if I'm pasting a bunch of options, is really, it's awful. Because like if you copy them all in, they like line up with each other and you have to delete a bunch of them or something. I don't know. I think it's an area it could be improved, but.
I'm gonna plug May 6th. Andy will be here on May 6th. Come let him know.
Yeah, that's the kind of stuff we want. Casey, you got a question in the Q&A. Do you find that the scores all calculate at the same time, or do you have a delay in the workflow to make sure everything's calculated before comparing?
I do have a delay in the workflow. I'm a big 1-minute delay workflow girl. But this specific workflow, I actually have a 15-minute delay just because there's so much happening on the back end. The form has to get the properties have to get populated on the contact record. 3 scores have to get calculated, and then all those if-then statements have to get sorted. 15 minutes is probably over the top but it just feels like a lot's going on, and mostly I didn't want to get my client complaining that people are getting the wrong score or anything.
Thanks for that. There's some long questions in here. I'm doing my best to read. also for Casey, with score properties sunsetting, do you have an idea on what you will do to move the data over? I guess we need to move things over to new tools. Sad face.
Yeah, so I originally built this in the old scoring property, and then I rebuilt it. Nothing like a deadline to get some work done. So I moved it over before this presentation, but obviously the scoring properties are sunsetting in August. I have done a lot of LinkedIn videos on migrating your scoring properties. Head over to my LinkedIn, look up Casey Hawkins. And I have a lot of videos there already. Happy to do more sessions especially as the deadline gets closer, and nothing like a deadline.
Yeah. Great. Ricky, for you, Maureen says, I may have missed it, but how do you prep that email? Is it automatically sent out or do you manually engage with it? We're not hearing your, there you go.
There we go.
Well,
I do manually do it. I start with the HubSpot template with my HubSpot sales extension and use that for half of the words. Copy and paste deal names from the dashboard. At least with Firefox and a Mac, when you do that, it'll automatically do the URL and everything, make it super clean. And then I leverage responsive cards that I believe Waylon just presented to keep the exit criteria that is for each stage, to keep it at the top of the left-hand column. When I go in a pending deal, I should see all the fields that I collect on pending. When I go into a newly created deal, so on and so forth. That really helps a bunch. And then I also have an Excel spreadsheet just with a formula that's blank that I use when I type in two numbers. The revenue used to be 10,000 and now it's 12,000, and it just tells me the difference in the percentage.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
I'm tired of using my calculator every day. But yes, that is one thing I wish we could do is on the change of monthly revenue. That quick percentage, I am working on a solution for that right now. But there is a card that I have on my Jira board that I want to build where you can do a graph in the middle of that activity board of monthly revenue change. You could do the change of a property. And I think that would be really cool to see this line graph over time on a deal, see it go up and down. But yes, all manual, lots of work.
The next show and tell, Ricky, you've got some work to do for us.
Thanks.
Okay, we have a few questions in here that I think are not particularly directed at any one of you. I think you've just got everybody's gears going and they're thinking about things they can build in HubSpot. So John asks, if I have enterprise marketing, can I create a private app that uses the multi-step form template that will create a record in a custom object? The new multi-step forms do support custom objects.
Yeah.
I know that much.
Yeah,
I don't know exactly what
I don't know why you would.
doing.
Yeah, I don't know why you would need a private app for that. I think you can just use multi-step forms. But if you wanted to create like a fully custom module, you'd have to submit to a serverless function before hitting the API with the private app. If you wanted to use like your custom object endpoints, because you can't just submit to the API from the front end. But yeah, I'm not sure you'd need to do that. I think you can just set that up in the forms tool.
Great, agreed. And then the question that was distracting me earlier, Charlene, you gave a lot of great details here, and I'm worried if I read it out loud, it just won't come across. I see you're still here. Can I bring you on stage? Is that a thing? Would you be willing to come up and discuss this live about syncing properties?
I love your question, by the way. It's a good one.
Great. Okay, so I'm giving you the ability to come on theoretically. We have run into trouble with this before where like cameras and mics don't work. Hey,
looks like we're going.
All right.
Yeah, I feel like this has come up with like a number of people, but you know, I have had a number of clients where you've had issues with trying to keep properties in sync. So for example, I usually try to keep as much as possible data that has to get input into like the sales process. So like whenever deals move into new stages, that reps can just get prompted with information they have to put in. I don't have to like go to this company record to update this, go to this whatever, like skipping all that because I know it's not going to get done. But where the issue can come up is keeping things in sync. So one example is in the sales process. Let's say when we move to close one, I ask for the shipping information. So the sales rep puts that in. That then goes and creates a ticket in the production pipeline, which is just like a service ticket pipeline. But hypothetically, the shipping address could change. So now it makes more logical sense to update that from the ticket. But now it's living both on the ticket as well as the deal. So I'm curious how everyone else is doing that. In this case, we would just create a sync property. It lives on the deal. If it changes after the fact, they just have to go back to the deal, update it, it'll sync back to the ticket. I'm curious if anyone else has figured out like a better solution.
This is a tough one.
Which I think this could all get resolved potentially with like, if in those deal pop-ups, we could actually have pop-ups for different objects, like populating on
Yeah,
a property
Waylon, I was
ticket.
kind of thinking like associated object property, those cards. You got the associated object property cards.
Yeah.
Maybe instead of trying to bring them over.
That's actually a great maybe, because because you could have an associated property pulled onto the record. If it's easy to grab that, like if there's not 30 of these associated objects, I think that might be what I would try first. That seems like the simplest answer. And I can, do you know what I'm saying, or did that make any sense? Yeah. So if it's on the ticket, for example, whatever property, you could pull that onto, in this case, I think this is a deal, but you could make an association property list and then maybe pull that controlling property. So not the sync one, but the one from the object where it actually lives into the middle section, for example. And then maybe if you can update it from there.
Yeah, that would totally work.
And you have access to filters and association labels here. So even if there's a lot of these objects present, you can probably filter to the point that you can get just what you need. Maybe the most recently created, or whatever your use case might be.
Yeah, I always forget about those middle card updates that they rolled out.
Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff in there. I think alternatives are like kind of hacky and weird. I don't know, because it is so awful when these things have to go back and forth, like, and they're syncing each other. Yeah,
and this way you can edit in there as well.
Yeah, because you can click in and inline edit. Yeah, they're really slick.
Cool. Well, good teamwork, everyone. I think this was great. I think this was fantastic. Thanks to our presenters. Thanks to everyone who asked questions. Thanks to Charlene for being willing to hop on here at the end spontaneously. Deanna dropped a link where you can give us feedback on this. I am dropping the link for the forum where you can volunteer to do a future one. I think this is some of the most valuable learning that happens here at the Admin Hug. Would love to see more of it in the future. But we are going to go ahead and call it a day here. So thanks everyone for being here. Hope to see you back next week.